everyone, welcome to the OklaRoots YouTube channel. In today's tutorial, we're going to go over an adorable little crossbody bag that is perfect for all of your end of summer travels, looking into holiday travels, and it's by one of my absolute favorite pattern writers. Today, we're going to be making the On The Go 2.0 from By Any Patterns. Now, let me just tell you, By Any Patterns are really written for a combination of quilter and bag maker. Maybe you're a quilter getting into bag making. Maybe you're a bag maker getting into quilting. Their patterns are really combining both techniques. However, you don't always have to do that. If you're like, I'm a bag maker and I want to make the bag, but I don't have any patience for quilting, you don't have to quilt it, and that's what I'm going to go over today because I am the same way. I would love to make a quilted version of this, but when time is limited and I just really want to make the design, I'm going to show you how I do that. So this adorable little crossbody has so many fun pockets, as every By Any pattern does. I feel like By Any is like the expert when it comes to pockets and then like pocket placement. It's so original how they construct their bags. So on this here, we have a flap. You see this beautiful flap. On the flap, we have a clear slip pocket, and then we have a zipper pocket, which is a good place to put your passport, or even better place to put your passport is on the back pocket here. You have a slip pocket right here, and this is what's going to be against your body. Then if you lift up the flap, I like this too because when you lift up the flap, it doesn't just like hang here, it goes all the way around and like covers the back panel completely. So it's like extra protection on that pocket whenever you're digging around in your bag. On the front panel here, we have a card slot pocket, great for an ID, things like that. And then on the inside, you see we have it fully lined and it is bounded, which means it has binding. And then we have 3 card slot pockets. This bag is built for function, which I absolutely love. So I'm going to be playing around with a couple of adjustments here based on what I have and what I have patience for. Like I said, I'm not going to be quilting any of this. If you are doing the quilted version, then I mean, have at it. It's going to look amazing. I'm not going to be doing the quilted version. Instead, I will be using a combination of vinyl and bonded nylon. I love that type of material because it's really easy to keep this bag clean, especially when you're traveling. My bags get pretty dirty when I'm traveling around because they end up just hitting everything. So bonded nylon and vinyl combination with a water-resistant canvas lining is like a mom's dream. It just makes it so much easier to keep the bag clean. As you can see, this is a crossbody bag with just a standard crossbody strap on it. I am going to go over how to make all of that. It's a very cute bag. I'll try it on real quick for you. So for reference, I am 5 feet 4 inches tall and a size small or medium, and this is how it hangs on me. So just big enough for my wallet, my cell phone, my passport, you know, just the bare necessities, the things I need. I'm not going to put a water bottle in here. I'm not going to carry all the kids' pillows and stuffies and things like that. So this is also what I would consider a bag that's a great combination bag when it comes to traveling, because as the mom, I am carrying all those things. I do have their water bottles. I do have their pillow or their blankets or whatever comfort items they have, especially when we're traveling long distances. And so I have a big bag, which I have all that stuff in. But when we're getting on the plane, when we're going through security or something like that, and I have to quickly get out documents, I don't want to root around in a giant bag and like tear stuff out. You know what I mean? You know what I mean. So having a small crossbody bag in conjunction with the larger bag is so helpful because then it's just, I have everything I need right here. I have our passes, passports, everything right in this little purse right here. So thank you as always to By Any Patterns for allowing me to use your patterns on my channel. I love going over By Any Patterns. I will tell you pretty much most of their patterns are printed patterns. So example, here's the On The Go 2.0. They're not PDF patterns, so you have to buy the printed version. They are designed in all rectangles, so there's really not a whole lot of templates you need to buy or pattern pieces you need to cut out. I did get some more of their patterns here, and I'll tell you because I know I'm going to get asked this, which ones are coming next. I have Leader of the Pack, which is like our new backpack pattern. I have 2 little totes, which is like a small tote pattern, which I thought would also be great for travel. And then the one that I get asked about at least once a week, A Place for Everything 2.0. And I know, I will tell you, the bag I want to make more than any other bag on my list is this one right here, A Place for Everything 2.0. And the only reason I haven't done it yet is because it is extensive. This is like a bag book catalog. It's got lots of pages. It's got lots of pockets. It's a big one. And so to film this, I'm going to need a good amount of time to practice making it and then to film it. Time is something I'm limited on at the moment. So I keep this on my sewing table. I've kept it here for months because when the opportunity arises and I can get my time organized, this is what we're going to be making. So I know you're asking about it, and I want to make it just as badly as you want to see me make it. Probably more. If you're new to the OklaRoots YouTube channel, please consider clicking subscribe down below. If at any point you like this video, please give it a like. Any questions, comments, shout-outs, leave them down in the comment section below. If there's another by any pattern, by all means, leave it down below. Even if it is a place for everything 2.0, put it in the comments because I want to make it too. They have so many incredible patterns, which I really love because it's a diverse pattern group. If you want to make a small bag, a big bag, a trinket, whatever skill level you're at, they have something for everybody. So I think that whatever you're feeling, go check out their site because I promise they have a bag that you want to make. Alrighty guys, let's get started. Okay, so you don't really need a ton of stuff for this bag. I'm just going to use bits and pieces from a lot of different materials. So you need about a yard of exterior material. Now for my exterior material, I'm going to use 3 different things. I'm going to use some vinyl and I'm going to use 2 bonded nylons. I like to add the vinyl to the gusset because I feel like it provides a lot of structure. The front panel and the back panel have pockets and things added to it, so you have all those layers to add more structure to that, but the gusset really doesn't have a lot going on besides the exterior and the lining material. So for the gusset on the bottom and the zipper gusset, I'm going to use this vinyl. I also like to use small cuts of vinyl throughout the pattern, so I'll show you the pattern pieces in just a minute. And then for the rest of the bag, I'm going to use the bonded nylon. I like to use the solid for the front and the back panel, and then for the flap and for the back panel pocket, any sort of little details, I do like to use this printed bonded nylon. I just like the contrast of that. If you like it all to be solid or all to be printed, I mean, you do you. I think it would still actually look really beautiful if it was just these two. I did debate on that quite a bit, adding this pink or this, but this is what you're going to see the most of. You're not going to see a whole lot of the pink, so I think it'll be okay. We'll see. And then you're going to want a half a yard of material for the lining. I am only using water-resistant canvas for this. I love water-resistant canvas because it is lightweight. I am not quilting anything today, so I don't have any sort of batting or fusible fleece. I'm not using any stabilizer. There's a couple places where, because of my snaps, I will want to reinforce it. I'm going to show you how I do that. But for the most part, this is really all I'm using. So like I said, I'm not quilting this, so I don't have any soft and stable. You can definitely add the soft and stable, which is like a foam, to this vinyl and bonded nylon material. You don't have to use quilt cotton just to use that. I'm just opting not to quilt today to save time. You're gonna need about a 5" by 10" cut of clear vinyl to cut down into 2 pieces. Now this is actually the clear vinyl that's from by Annie, and it is my favorite clear vinyl to work with if you want just clear vinyl. I have all kinds of clear vinyls that has prints and stuff on it, but this is the best stuff for just plain old clear vinyl. It has a great paper on the back. It's super easy to sew. It doesn't stretch. I don't know. I highly recommend this clear vinyl from them. Then I have 2 zippers. One that is the main zipper and it is 14 inches long and it has 2 zipper pulls, and then another one that is the flap zipper and it is 10 inches long and has just 1 zipper pull. These are both zippers from by Annie. This is the size like 4.5, I think. So a lot of times we'll use size 3 zippers or size 5 zippers. The size really just has to do with the width of the zipper teeth. But this is a size 4.5, and I do find that the cloth part is pretty wide. So we're going to use these because the pattern is designed to go with this zipper. And I love switching out their zipper pulls with their zippers, which is why we have purple zipper pulls on a pink zipper. Okay, I'm going to mix up some of this stuff a little bit. I'm not going to be doing their strapping the way they do it in the pattern because, again, pure laziness, really. So I'm just going to be using this beautiful webbing for my crossbody strap. I cut this down to 52 inches long. This is the only places I'm using the webbing. To go with my crossbody strap, I have 2 1" wide swivel hooks and a 1" wide strap adjuster. Then I have 2 1" wide triangle rings. You could use D-rings or triangle rings, whichever one you're more comfortable with. Then I have a magnetic snap. Now I'm using a magnetic snap that is rivet backed. You could use a magnetic snap that has prongs. I'll explain to you kind of what you need to do. However, the pattern is written for you to use a magnetic snap that is a sew-in one. And I think I have one of those, but I don't know for sure. So I'm going to use what I'm comfortable working with. However, we do have to tweak some things and we're going to not use other things to accommodate this. So again, we'll walk through that. I'm adjusting here and there just to work with what I've got. So there's a reason for that. Also, I have some medium-sized rivets. I get these from Emmeline bags. These are going to be for here and there, mostly for the bag strap and then the triangle rings. I have my bag tag as always that I'll sew in, and then a good amount of binding. The pattern's gonna have you make your own binding using quilt cotton, but as you can see, we're not using any quilt cotton today, so I'm using this 1-inch wide fold over elastic binding. I do like this 1-inch size because it's a little bit wider and it helps when we have thicker seams or we have seams that are 3/8 of an inch. So I worked with this one already and it worked out great. So I would say I have like, I don't know, I always say buy in yards of 3 to 5 yards because you're never gonna not want to use it. You know what I mean? Like you're never gonna like have too much, be like, what do I do with the rest of it? You'll find another project to use it on. All right, so here's most of the other stuff. I'm sure I'm forgetting something. I have a rivet press here because I will be installing rivets. I'm also using my rivet press to install the magnetic snap. So if this is something you're interested in, if you have a rivet press or you're interested in buying one, there's a whole bundle on Cam Snaps that comes with the press and a whole bunch of die sets for a discounted price. I have a video where I go over all that and they pretty much just put together a bundle with all those things, so it's really handy. But these are the magnetic die snaps that I'm going to be using with that. So you have a set of 3. Then I have a hole punch as always to help with the rivets. I'm going to have 2 sizes of basting tape today. This is 1/4 inch wide and 1/8 of an inch wide. It's really helpful putting all this together to have some tape. I have my turning wand and a seam ripper as always. A couple marking tools. I have an air erasing marker and I have a like chalk pencil marker, which is really cool because it's got 3 colors in it. You just like switch and it's like pink, white, black. I love this pencil. It's just like my favorite thing ever. And then I have a lighter as always to clean up any loose threads. Good amount of plastic clips. The thread I'm going to be using through the needle is from Saya Swag and it is color Coral Reef. It's a Tex 45 weight thread. It's a little bit thicker. The thread I'm using in my bobbin is a Mara 100 weight thread. Both of these threads are polyester. I do not use cotton thread when I make bags. Then for the needle I'm going to be using is a Microtex 8012 as always for bag making, and then I have my Bianni stiletto, which is my favorite thing to keep at the sewing machine, and a 1-inch by 6-inch ruler. So let's walk through the pattern pieces. If you've worked with Bianni patterns before, then you know that they are really designed for quilters moving into bag making or bag makers who are moving into quilting. They are beautifully written to combine quilting and bag making, and it's so awesome to see that. However, you can skip the quilting step. If you're like, I just really want to make that bag, but I don't want it to be quilted, you don't have to quilt it. So that's what I'm going to show you today. I'm not quilting anything today, but I'm still going to make this amazing bag. So I have 2 cuts of exterior, one for the front panel, one for the back panel, and then I have 2 cuts of lining also for the front and back panel. If you were following the pattern, these 2 would be quilted with batting or foam in between them, wrong sides together like that, and this would be a quilted cut. I'm not quilting it today though. However, if you look at the pattern, you will see that you make a couple of large rectangles using your exterior material and your lining material, or your coordinating material and your lining material, and then you quilt all that, and then from the quilted large rectangle, you cut out these smaller rectangles. I'm just doing it a little differently. And then I have 1 cut of my coordinating material or extra material, whatever you'd like, for the flap, and then a lining cut for the flap. Now on the back panel, you're going to have pocket D. So you're going to need 1 cut of exterior coordinating material and a cut of lining material, and then you're going to need some binding. I'm going to be using my water-resistant canvas for binding. It's the lining material. Okay, so for the flap, you're actually going to have 2 pockets. You're going to have a zipper pocket, which you're going to have A cuts for. You're going to have a little bit of binding for the top of the zipper, and then you're going to have a coordinating or your exterior fabric, whatever, for the bottom part, and then a lining as well. And then you're also going to have a clear slip pocket, which is really cool. So you're going to need 1 cut of your clear panel, and you're going to need a binding cut for that. So we're also going to be making an ID pocket, which is really, really cute. I love how this comes together. It's fun to put this one together. So this is a small cut of clear vinyl, and then you're going to have 2 long binding cuts and then 2 short binding cuts for that. And then we have 3 pockets we're going to build, and these are going to be card slot pockets on the inside of the bag. These are completely optional. You do build them individually and then stack them up on one another, and I'll be honest, it does get pretty bulky if you're using other materials. So I made the first ones using bonded nylon, and they were pretty bulky. So I'm going to stick with lightweight material for this. Even quilt cotton would be great here. And then finally we have our cuts for the gusset. You're going to have 2 exterior cuts and 2 lining cuts. This is going to go around the zipper, and then you're going to have your bottom gusset. So for your bottom gusset, you're going to have 1 main exterior, 1 main lining. And then over here I have a few more extras. I have 2 cuts of vinyl. Each of these are 2 inches by 3 inches wide. I'm telling you that because we're going to build this. These are going to go for the triangle rings. So these are going to be folded back to hold the triangle rings in place. And then I have 2 cuts of my exterior material, and these are going to be used for the zipper loop binding. So pretty much we're going to make our tabs for our triangle rings. We're going to sew them on, and then we're going to cover the raw edges with these cuts here. You'll see how it works, but I just wanted to, this might be a little bit different from the pattern since I'm not building the webbing and all that. Okay, so before we get started, I need to do some prep work. And the first thing I'm going to do is add a little bit of stabilizer to where I'm going to be attaching my magnetic snaps. Now, since I'm not doing the sew-in magnetic snaps that then get hidden with fabric and everything, I have to think about this ahead of time. So I'm going to attach one of my magnetic snaps to the lining side of the flap and one to the front main exterior panel. So I need to make sure those are the 2 panels I'm working with. I'm going to mark the midpoints on the top and the bottom of these to help me find placement. All right, now on your lining flap on the wrong side, you're going to measure up from the bottom midpoint mark, and you're going to make a little dot that is 1 3/8 of an inch from the bottom. This is on the wrong side. Now I'm going to grab a piece of stabilizer and I'm just going to add it over that. If you want to adhere it with an iron, you can. If you want to just glue that on, you can. But that's where I'm going to install one of my magnetic snaps. So I want to have the stabilizer right there. Now on the exterior front panel, we're going to flip this over and look at the wrong side. And on this panel, we're going to measure up from the bottom edge again and make a dot at 2 7/8 of an inch. So the second magnetic snap is going to go that high on the main panel, and that's where I'm going to adhere my piece of Decovil light. We're going to measure these again and mark them as we get to that point later in the pattern, but for now, this is where everything goes. Okay, so once you have your stabilizer or whatever sort of reinforcement you're using adhered, if you're using magnetic snaps like this that have the prongs on them, then I would suggest you just add them now. So if you're doing that on the lining of the flap side, you're going to do the thinner one, which is the male magnetic snap. It's nice and thin. You're going to install that right there, 1 3/8 of an inch from the bottom edge. And then on the main panel side, you would install the female. So you know what, let's go ahead and do that. Let's just install these snaps now so we don't have to think about it later. Okay, so you can do this with the prongs, like I said, or you can do it with this handy dandy magnetic snap rivets. So I have my little dots marked on the right side of my material, the right side of the lining of the flap and the right side of the exterior main panel, front main panel. And I'm just going to pop a hole where those dots are using my hole punch. And like I said, the flap is going to get the thinner of the snaps. So that's usually, every time I've worked with them, it's the male one. So it has a little nub that's always the thinner one. So I'm going to insert the male part of the snap so it's on the right side of the lining, flip it over, and I'm just going to snap on this little rivet. Now I'm just going to put the die set in. So it's going to be the die that looks like the female end. It's going to go on the bottom and then just screw in the top. And then flip this in and gently press this in place. Now I have the magnetic snap that is the female one, which is usually just a little bit thicker, and it has an indent that goes down. That's going to go on the right side of the front exterior panel. Flip it over, add the rivet on the back, and then switch out this bottom die for the other one, right side down. And gently press this in place. You'll notice if you press this in place too firmly with this material, it's going to pinch it, so you don't want to push it down really hard. You want to just gently push it down. So there we go. So now we have our magnetic snaps installed and all ready to go. If you're using the prongs, and so you cut your slits and you put your prongs in the back here with the washer, you do want to cover those with some sort of a duct tape or something so that they don't rub against the other material. Because like right here, these prongs will rub against the backside of this material, especially if you don't have any sort of, you know, quilting or fleece or batting or foam. The nice thing about these rivets is that they're so smooth, we don't have to worry about that. There's no jagged edges. It's not going to wear it down over time. I mean, it still could because it is, you know, an indentation, but it's less likely. Okay, so once we have these snaps on, now what we want to do is we want to baste all these panels together. So we're going to build them as if we had quilted them without quilting them. So we're going to take our flap, lining, and exterior panels and lay them wrong sides together. Grab some clips, line up all 4 edges and all 4 corners, and clip wrong sides together. And then repeat this for the exterior front and its lining panel and the exterior back and its lining panel, clipping them wrong sides together. So you're going to repeat this process of clipping the exterior and linings wrong sides together for flap, front and back main panel, the flap pocket, the back pocket, the bottom gusset, and the zipper gusset. All these have their exteriors and linings clipped wrong sides together. Now we're gonna take this to the sewing machine and we're gonna baste along the outer edges of every single one of these at around 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I would even suggest a little bit less than 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. If you did the quilting method per the pattern, then you've already done this, then you're good. You already have your exterior and linings wrong sides together, quilted with some foam in between, and you can skip all this. This is just if you're not quilting it. Okay, so here they all are basted together. You might have noticed whenever I was basting the vinyl, I like to baste the vinyl with the vinyl side down. I find that if I have the vinyl side up, sometimes it starts kind of stretching and shifting, and it's like, why is it longer than the lining now? If you ever run into that, just flip it over so the vinyl side down, it actually sticks less. So you can set all these pieces to the side and add them to their binding and however you want to organize it. So now let's work on these triangle rings. So I have my 2 tabs for my triangle rings. Like I said, these are 2 cuts that are 2 inches by 3 inches each, and they're my vinyl cuts. You want something a little bit sturdier. If you're using a lightweight material, you will want to add some sort of stabilizer to the back of these, like Decoville Light, something like that. So what I did was I drew a line going centered down the 2 long edges, and using that line, I'm going to cover it with a piece of 1/4 inch wide double-sided tape, and then just pull off the paper and fold the long raw edges back wrong sides together to meet that middle line and add to the tape. You might also need clips depending on your material. Do this for both your tabs. So now I'm going to take these 2 tabs to the sewing machine and I'm going to top stitch along both long edges at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then I'm going to do another row of top stitching along both long edges of both straps at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, because I am leaving the back like this. We will have those raw edges on the back, so I want this to be as tight as possible. So 4 rows of top stitching on each strap. Once you have these top stitched, you're going to thread them through the bottom of your triangle ring or just the bottom of your D-ring and wrap them wrong sides together, pulling the short ends to meet one another. Do this for both rings. And now let's take this to the sewing machine and let's just sew along these bottom short edges at about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. All right, your little tabs with your D-rings or triangle rings are all good to go. You can set these to the side. So next up are these side straps. And one thing I want to make note of is that you actually end up top stitching these twice. So let's talk about that. So I'm going to prep these like the pattern suggests and draw a midpoint line going along the center. And the midpoint line runs between the 2 long edges, so that's the side you want folded back. So the shorter edges are on the left and right, the long edges are on the top and the bottom. And then I'm going to add some double-sided tape over that midpoint line, and then take that paper off the tape and fold the 2 long edges back wrong sides together to meet that midpoint line and stick them to the tape. So do this for both of these pieces. So now the pattern says to take this to the sewing machine and top stitch along the 2 long edges, or all 4 edges, at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. The thing is when you attach this to the exterior gusset, you will top stitch again at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So you have a couple options here. If you're using thread that doesn't have a lot of contrast, so for example, I'm using a light pink thread on light pink material, I can do that. I can top stitch it now and then just go over it again later. However, if you're using thread that contrasts a lot, it might look a little messy if it's not perfect stitching. So to handle that, you could just not top stitch it right now and then tape it on later and only top stitch it once. Or you could actually top stitch right now at about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So it's going to be more towards the center. And then when we add it later, we'll top stitch at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I'm just trying to, we'll have this again with the ID pocket. So you want to think about this a little bit ahead of time. I'm going to do the 1/4 inch option just to see how it looks. So I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and I'm going to top stitch along both long folded edges at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, so I did my top stitching. It's kind of hard to see, which again was intentional. So when I attach this later, I'll do 1/8 of an inch, so it'll be just outside of that. So I'm gonna set these to the side now. So now let's build our crossbody strap, and I'm gonna build this using rivets, so it's nice and quick and easy. So when working with webbing, I always like to grab a lighter and melt down the edges. And if you wanted to, you can add a little piece of vinyl to the edges of this. I actually did that on the first one. I'm not gonna do it this time. We do that a lot with fancy straps, but if you wanted to do that, I would suggest you cut a piece of 1 inch wide by 2 inch wide vinyl and then just wrap it around the end of this, stitch it on, and it's a really cute accent. Here, I'll show you that on the first bag. You see, just added a little scrap of vinyl, easy peasy, stitched it on. But instead, what I'll do is just a double fold for this one. So I'm gonna take my strap slider and I'm going to insert my strap from the bottom and over that middle bar, pull it out, and then I'm going to fold it over by about 3/4 of an inch, just like that. And then I'm gonna fold that over and wrap it around the middle bar. So I'm doing that so that the raw edge that I folded under is pretty much meeting, almost touching that middle bar. So we have a nice clean fold over, no raw edges. And then if you'd like, you can grab a pen, I usually do, and just mark the middle so you know where you want your rivet to go. I find that it works out better if you mark it before you punch it, because you think you know where the middle is when you have the hole punch, but you're not always right. So now I'm gonna grab my hole punch and I'm just gonna punch right where I marked. So I'm pretty much going through 3 layers of webbing here. And then I'll insert a rivet and snap it in. And there we go. Okay, so now with your strap, wrong side up, so the folded edge up, keep it straight. And let's go to the other end. Thread your hook on so that the hook is facing down. Pull the webbing through there. And then pull the webbing in half, wrong sides together. Go up from the bottom of your slider where the fold over is. Give yourself enough slack. Go over the middle bar, down towards the other side. So when you pull on this, you should have your hook and then your slider in the middle and then nothing on the end. And then we'll grab our remaining hook, and with strap right side up and hook side up, you're gonna thread the webbing through the hook. Once again, we're gonna fold it over by about 3/4 of an inch and then wrap it around that bottom of the hook. Grab a marking tool and mark where you want your rivet, and then punch a hole where you marked. And then insert your rivet. You see how quick and easy that is? Now, if you're not using rivets, everything I did you can do as well. Instead of punching a hole and adding a rivet, just top stitch. Just take this to a sewing machine. I would use like a zipper foot and just stitch all around all the edges to hold it in place. And once again, I'm gonna grab my rivet press, and this time I have the die set for my rivets. Just gonna pop those in, and then just insert your rivets and press them down. And there you go. I'll tell you what, once you get the hang of this, you can probably make these straps in less than a minute. Like, they're so quick. I love it. So you can set your strap to the side. So now we're gonna work on the flap pocket. So we're gonna start with pocket A, take it and lay it exterior right side up. And we're going to add a little bit of double-sided tape to the top edge of this pocket. And now remove the paper from that tape. And then take your zipper, and you're gonna lay your zipper so that when the zipper closes, it closes towards the left. So just like this. Move the zipper out of the way, and then lay your zipper right side down. And it doesn't really matter if it's centered or not, just as long as it overhangs on both sides. Now sew along the edge where the zipper and the pocket panel come together, add a 1/4 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. Once you have that stitched on, you're going to flip your pocket down so the exterior is right side up and the zipper is right side up, and give it a good press along that seam. And now let's go back to the sewing machine and just top stitch right along the top edge of your exterior material at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, now we want to attach the binding to the top. So grab your binding piece of material, and this needs to be lightweight. Please, I mean, if you want to use vinyl, go for it, but I'm going to suggest you use really lightweight material for this. And I'm not using the elastic because I don't need it to be that wide. So I'm going to take my binding material and I'm going to lay it wrong side up, and I'm going to fold it in half, long sides together, wrong sides together, and just really press along that edge. There we go. So now we're going to take our pocket panel here, we're going to lay it with lining side up, and we're going to take our binding and we're going to attach the binding to the top edge of our zipper just like this. So make sure the sides match up with the sides of your pocket below, and just clip this in place to the back of your zipper tape. And now we'll go to the sewing machine and sew along this clipped edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. All right, once you have it stitched on the back side, you're going to press it up just like this. Flip it to the exterior right side, the zipper right side, and you're going to fold it over the top edge of your zipper. And it's a tight fold, and it should just come down and cover that stitching, okay? It is tight, but it should cover the stitching. So just wrap it around the top of your zipper, making sure the folded edge completely covers the stitching, and clip in place. Now we'll take this back to the sewing machine, and we're going to top stitch along that folded edge closest to the zipper teeth at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, the zipper part's done. You can set that to the side. Now we can work on the flap pocket B. So prep your binding just like we did on the A pocket by folding the long edges, wrong sides together, and press really well along that fold. And then for this one, you're going to want to take the paper off the back of your clear vinyl if you have it, and then just line up the raw edge of your binding with the top long edge of your clear pocket, which is hard to see, I know. And Now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch along this top long edge, the raw edge of the binding of the clear vinyl at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. If you're worried about the clear vinyl sticking, just grab that piece of paper and lay it underneath it so it's covering about 3/4 of it, okay? You don't want to sew over the paper. If you do, it's not a big deal, but you don't want to. So just lay it underneath there and help that guide you while you're sewing this at the machine. All right, once you have it stitched on, give it a good press by pressing the binding up and then wrapping it around to the front. And so when you do this, you need to make sure you're covering that stitching. So it's a pretty tight wrap. That's why clips are useful here. All right, and now we're gonna take this to the sewing machine and just top stitch along this bottom folded edge here at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, your clear pocket is now done, so take your zipper pocket and lay it exterior right side up, and then take your clear pocket and lay it right side up, matching up the bottom corners and the bottom edge and the side edges carefully and clip in place. Isn't this adorable? Isn't it just adorable? I love it. Now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and just baste along the sides and the bottom at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, this flat pocket is all ready to go. You can set it to the side. So now we're going to work on the ID pocket, which is so cute. And this is one of those pockets again where you're going to do some top stitching now that you will go over later. You do need to do the top stitching right now. So I would switch to a thread color that matches your material for this step. So the first thing you want to do is grab your 4 binding cuts, your 2 short ones, your 2 long ones, and flip to the wrong side on each one of these and fold them long sides together, wrong sides together, and press well. If you want to add clips to help with this, by all means go ahead and do that. So once you have your bindings folded, grab your clear pocket, and if you do have a clear pocket with the design on it, we're going to be working on the back side first. So lay your clear pocket wrong side up and then grab your 2 short cuts, and you're going to line up the raw edges with the short edges of your clear vinyl and clip together. Do the same thing with the other short edge and the other short binding, again making sure the raw edges are being clipped to the clear vinyl. So now we can take this to the sewing machine and just sew along these 2 short edges at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. Once you have the sides sewn on, and then what you're going to do is you're going to wrap that binding around the seam and bring it to the front, just like we've been doing with the other pockets. So now we're looking at the right side of the clear vinyl if you're using a clear vinyl that has a right and wrong side. Obviously this does not, so just wrapping it around. But you want to make note of this when we attach the other binding. You want to make sure it's always wrapped to the right side. So once you have that wrapped around the edge, you can take this to the sewing machine and just top stitch along the inner folded edge of your binding at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I suggest back stitching at the beginning and the end. All right, once you have the sides on, I suggest finding the midpoint on the top and bottom of your clear vinyl. So I'm just going to fold it in half, and I'm going to make a little tiny cut on the clear vinyl. It's going to be hidden in the end, so you're never going to see it. And clear vinyl doesn't fray or anything, so you can make a teeny tiny snip. And then mark the midpoint along the raw edge of your long binding. So just fold your long binding in half, not the folded edge, just the raw edge. Same thing, I'm going to use scissors to clip into that so I have the midpoint on both my long binding pieces. Okay, so take your clear vinyl piece and lay it wrong side up. So on the wrong side, that's where we don't have the fold over top stitching, right? Take your binding piece so that the raw edge goes along the top edge of your clear vinyl, and you're going to match up your midpoints and clip the top long binding to the top of your clear vinyl. It is much wider than the actual clear vinyl piece. It's supposed to be, but we do want to make sure it's centered. So then just add clips along this edge. Flip this around and repeat on the bottom as well. Again, we're just clipping it to the wrong side of our clear vinyl. Okay, once you have that on, we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch along both long edges, the raw outer edges of our long bindings at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You're going to go all the way along it. So where the clear vinyl is and also where it extends. 1/4 inch seam allowance along both long edges, back stitch at the beginning and the end. All right, once you have it stitched on, press the binding up and away from the clear vinyl, and also press right along the stitching where it extends beyond the clear vinyl. And then wrap that binding around the top edge of your window so that it completely covers the stitching. Start with the clear vinyl part first, so wrap it around the edges of the side binding as well, and then continue wrapping it in half so that it's just folded over. So you see the back here? There we go. Just fold over just like that. So as it's just naturally folding in the way you want it to. Tuck in the raw edges of the binding up and then fold over the folded edge so it's all nice and neat on the sides. You see, you don't have any raw edges on the long sides. Repeat for the other piece of your binding. All right, so once you have it all prepped, we're going to top stitch along the bottom folded edge of the long pieces of binding at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. You're going to do it over the clear vinyl in the middle and also on the bits that extend past it. Backstitch at the beginning and the end. And there we go, there's your little pocket. Isn't that cute? It's so cute. You can set this to the side now. So now we're gonna work on the back pocket, and I forgot to attach my cork tag, so I think instead of the sew on cork tag, I'm just gonna add in this little fold over tag. I don't use these a whole lot on my channel, but I know a lot of you guys have tags like this, so this is a great place to use something like that. So grab your back panel and lay it X to your right side up. Remember, the lining's already on the other side. Fold your binding in half, long sides together, wrong sides together. And then flip your pocket so it's lining side up and attach your binding to the top by aligning the raw edges with the top edge of your pocket. And then you can take this to the sewing machine and just sew along this top edge at 1/4 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. Now push up your binding and then flip it to the exterior right side and wrap around the binding so it completely covers the stitching. Use clips to hold it in place. And then I think I'm just gonna center this. You don't want it too close to the edges because they will be eaten up in the seam. So I'm just gonna kind of center my little woven tag, and I'm gonna tuck it underneath that folded edge of my binding, just like that. And that looks mostly centered. I think it's okay. So using the clips to make sure it stays where I want it. You could also use tape here if you'd like. I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and I'm going to top stitch along the bottom folded edge of the binding at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. Yeah, I love how that looks. It's so subtle. It doesn't like pop in your face. I don't really want anything to take away from the bag. So this pocket is prepped. So now let's do our little card pockets that go on the inside. You're going to take each one of these and you're going to fold them in half. And they are squares, so if you have a directional print, think about that now. But we're going to fold them in half so the top and the bottom edges come together, right sides together, and clip along the raw edges on the sides and the top. So do this for all 3 of your pockets. All right, so now once you have them clipped on the raw edge centered, mark a little 2-inch opening on each one of these because we're going to turn them right side out. So I just have little tiny marks here. Now we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to start at one of the bottom corners. We're going to sew up the side at 1/4 inch seam allowance and then sew over to the first mark, back stitch at the beginning and the end, skip over that opening, start again, back stitch, 1/4 inch seam allowance around the corner and down to the fold. Do this for all 3 of these pockets, just once again making sure you're back stitching everywhere and you are leaving that opening bit on the long edge unsewn. Once you have these sewn, let's trim down the corners. So gently cut at like a 45-degree angle along the corners where the fold is, very carefully. Don't get too close to the stitching. You don't want to rip a hole here. And then on the corners where the raw edges are, once again, 45-degree angle. And do this for all 3 of your pockets, just gently cutting. This material is lightweight, and if you cut too close to your stitching, it will poke a hole in the end. Now, I've got my little turning wand, and we're going to gently flip out this pocket so it's right side out by turning it out through the hole very gently. First, use your fingers to poke out those corners as best you can, and then grab your turning tool and gently poke that into the corners. Gently. If you're using a turning tool like that purple thing, the thing is very, very pokey, so I suggest not using the pokey end, use the square end, and be careful because those sharp turning tools, it's very easy to lose control and just jam a hole right into that corner, and it's a mess. So repeat that for the other 2 pockets. Okay, once you have them turned right side out, do your best to just kind of tug along the bottom edge here so that the raw edges of that opening just kind of go in on themselves and you have a nice straight edge, and then add some clips and then give it a good press. If you want to take it to the iron and press it, you can, but just press it down really well. Try to get those corners to poke out better. Now I'm just going to add clips all over. I'm going to add clips on all 4 sides. The top of my pockets are going to be the side that's just a single fold, not the side that has the seam. So it's going to be the long side with no seam. But you do want to flatten these out as much as possible. If you're using quilt cotton, or even if you're using this water-resistant canvas, you could just press this instead of using clips. Pressing it with an iron will flatten it out nicely. All right, once you have this flattened out, however you chose to do that, we're going to take this to the sewing machine, and we're going to top stitch along the bottom and the sides at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then top stitch along the top edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You could do it 1/8 of an inch if you like. Whatever's easiest for you. I will note that you will be top stitching over the sides again when we attach it to the lining. So if you're using a contrasting thread, just make note, you're going to go over those top stitching marks later. If you don't want to top stitch this right now, that's perfectly fine. I would suggest you just top stitch along the top folded edge at a 1/4 inch seam. You know, let's do that. Let's just do that to see how easy it is, okay? So what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to top stitch along the top folded edge of each one of these at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. Okay, you can set these pockets to the side now. So now we're going to work on the flap, and I'm going to skip over the instructions for installing the magnetic snap because I'm not using that type of snap. The type of snap that is being installed is a sew-in one, and then you're going to sew over a piece of facing, which is just another piece of your material, to cover the magnetic snap because it's not like ours where it should be seen in the end. But since we already prepped this, and I'm not doing that, I'm skipping all of that and just going straight to adding my zipper clear pocket to my flap. So I'm going to take my flap and lay it right side up, exterior right side up. And I'm going to take my little pocket here and lay it exterior right side up and just line it up with the bottom corners in the bottom edge. And clip along all the sides where they connect. And go all the way up the sides and also on the top of the zipper, everywhere. Make sure you move your zipper pull so it's in the center here. And now we're going to go to the sewing machine, and we're going to baste along the sides and the bottom at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then you also need to make sure you top stitch along the top edge of your zipper where the binding is, also at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I forget to do that most of the time on Bianni patterns, and then I end up with a slip pocket that's also a zipper pocket, which makes no sense. So you need to top stitch along the top edge to completely close the zipper pocket and baste along the sides and the bottom. All right, once you have this pocket sewn on, trim down the overhang of your zipper tape so you don't have any anymore. And whenever you cut zipper tape, it's always a good idea to grab a lighter and melt down the edges of that cut part of the tape so that it doesn't fray. It's beautiful, such a beautiful, beautiful design. Now, mark a midpoint on the top of your flap. So the very, very top short edge, mark a midpoint, and then measure in 1/2 of an inch from the top corners and just mark a line, just a little tick mark right on the top edge of your flap. 1/2 of an inch in from each side. And then you're going to connect that 1/2 inch mark with right where the top of the binding is on your pocket. And you can just use a rotary cutter here, or you can use a straight edge and a marking tool, and you're going to mark a line like that. We want to trim down the top corners just slightly. So do this on the other side as well, 1/2 of an inch from the top corner and right where the top of the binding is on the edge. And then since I drew the line, I'm just going to use some scissors to cut along that line. So you're creating these nice little slants going up the sides, over on the top. This gives the flap a really cool look. And then I'm going to flip the flap, so I'm going to look at the back side of the flap. It's easier for me to see. And I'm going to grab this tool here. Now the pattern does have a printable piece in it, or a piece you can cut out. It's a 2.5 inch circle, but I have this rounded corner halves template where we have 4.5, 2.5, 3.5, 1.5 inch corners. So all I want to do is take the 2.5 inch corner, and I'm going to line it up with the bottom 2 corners. Now, not the top corners of the flap, only the bottom 2 corners. I'm going to line up that 2.5 inch edge right there, and then just trace around it. And you're going to line up the straight edges of your panel with the straight edges of the template, if you're using this template. If you're not using this template, then just use the circle. I'm going to repeat this on the other bottom corner to help round it out. There we go. And then I'm going to grab my scissors, and I'm going to cut right around that corner that I traced. So now I'm going to take this back to the sewing machine, and I'm just going to baste along all the areas where I cut. So these 2 slants at the top and the 2 rounded corners on the bottom, just basting at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Isn't this just darling? I love it. So now let's add some binding. So I'm going to use my elastic binding. Elastic binding is also really nice because it's easy to get around those curves. Now if you made your own binding using quilt cotton, you're also going to be able to stretch it to go around the curves. So those are great options. I wouldn't use the water-resistant canvas binding because it will not stretch. So I'm going to take my elastic binding, and I'm going to use the matte side as the right side. And this binding already has a fold down the center, so I don't have to pre-fold it or anything. And I'm just going to hug it around the side. And I like it to overhang the top by just a bit because I can always trim it down. And I'm just gonna go around the side of my panel, clipping the binding in place. In some areas where there's like a change in the, you know, the angle, like right here by the zipper, I'll stretch the binding a little bit. So you don't have to have it get all crinkly. You can just stretch it as you go. I like to give it just a tiny bit of a stretch as I'm going along the straight edges as well. I like a nice tight fit with my binding. So you can see as I go around these tight corners, I'm gonna really stretch it. I mean, not like a ton, but I am gonna stretch it so it doesn't get all loopy and wavy. So once I have the binding attached, now I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and I'm going to top stitch from the inner edge of my binding by about 1/8 of an inch, maybe a little bit bigger, just to make sure I catch the binding on the back side. So take your time here and use a stiletto to help hold everything in place. Go slow, back stitch at the beginning and the end. All right, once you have the binding attached, just make sure you check the back and you caught all the edges. And then if you have any overhang on the top, you can trim it down. And now your flap is all done. Isn't that cute? I love this flap. You can set this to the side. Okay, now we're gonna work on the zipper gusset, and this part's a little tricky. So on your zipper tape, mark 1/8 of an inch in from each long edge of your zipper tape. And then after you have those marks drawn, add a piece of, I'm using 1/8 of an inch wide double-sided tape on one of the long edges of my zipper gusset part. So now this is gonna be this edge that goes against the zipper. So I'm gonna remove the paper from that tape, and I'm gonna move these zipper pulls out of the way as much as I can. And it doesn't really matter centering wise how this works, but you're gonna take your zipper gusset and you're gonna lay exterior right side down, and you're gonna match up that top long edge with the marked line. So it's not gonna match up right on the edge of your zipper. And you'll see why we do this in just a moment. So now with that stuck in place, I'm gonna take this to the sewing machine and I'm going to stitch this on at a large 1/4 inch seam allowance. So it's a generous 1/4 inch seam allowance. So it's not 3/8 of an inch. It's just a little bit bigger than a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, using a zipper foot, back stitching at the beginning and the end, and you're measuring from the edge of the zipper tape, not the edge of the vinyl. So one thing I really focus on when I'm stitching the zipper gusset in place is that I'm going past the basting stitches. So remember when we attached our exterior and lining zipper gussets together, we have a basting stitch that goes around the edge. When I stitch this on, I want to make sure I'm going further in from those basting stitches, because if I don't, then when I flip this out, you're going to see the basting stitches right here on the seam. So that's something to think about. So now this part's a little tricky. We're going to flip the zipper so that the edge of the zipper goes behind the zipper gusset on the lining side. Get it as flat as you can. Depending on your material, this can be a little challenging. Now, the pattern is going to suggest you stitch from the lining side so you can see this edge of your zipper tape, because you see what we want to do is when we fold this down, we want to stitch down the very edge of the zipper tape so it completely hides the raw edges tucked underneath. You see that? Isn't that clever? That's why you had it go a little bit further in, not right on the edge of the zipper. However, that means my bobbin thread is going to be seen on the exterior, and I don't want that. So I'm going to take this to the sewing machine, and I'm going to top stitch at about, I'm going to do it at just under a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, between 1/8 of an inch and a 1/4 inch seam allowance, right along the edge of my zipper gusset here, to hold this flat and to try to tuck in those raw edges on the back. Make sure as you're stitching, you keep checking and your zipper seam stays underneath the zipper panel, not the zipper itself. Don't let it move. Oh yeah, doesn't that? So it looks nice on the front, but look at the back. Isn't that so clean? Look at that, just flat. Love it. So you're gonna repeat on the other side. I'll walk you through it. So once again, we have that 1/8 of an inch mark on the zipper tape. It's faded a little bit, you might not see it, but I do. It's still there. And then I have my remaining zipper gusset with the double-sided tape, 1/8 of an inch wide double-sided tape. Remove the paper and line this up with that mark, and also make sure the short edges line up with the short edges of the zipper gusset you already sewn on. So it's exterior right side down, just like this. The lining's facing up, the zipper's facing up, and now we're gonna sew the zipper gusset on at a generous 1/4 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. And then once that's stitched on, press your exterior up and away from the center of the zipper, making sure that the seam stays behind the exterior, which is a little tricky when you have vinyl like I do. Just really press it as much as you can. And then we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch this in place. I'm again top stitching between 1/8 and a 1/4 inch seam allowance so that I can get close to the edge of that zipper tape, back stitch at the beginning and the end. Isn't that pretty? Look at that beautiful flat zipper. That's so cool. I like this. Okay, now you need to chop this down. This is too wide. You need the width of this to be 2.5 inches. So what you're gonna do, I can't get a grid out to show you this, but what you're gonna do is you're gonna lay this on a cutting mat, okay? And you're going to line up the center of your zipper teeth with one of the marks on your cutting grid that goes vertically, all right? And then you're going to measure 1 1/4 inch to the right and 1 1/4 inch to the left, and you're gonna cut down the sides, the outsides of the zipper gussets. It's pretty narrow, but make sure you do it by centering the zipper teeth first and then cut a little bit on the left and a little bit on the right. All right, you see it's quite a bit more narrow when you cut it down. So now I'm gonna take this to the sewing machine. I'm just gonna baste along these sliced edges at 1/8 inch seam allowance to hold it together. So now we're gonna build the gusset, but before we attach the two pieces, there are some lines you need to mark. I'm not sure if you can quite see it in the video, but you're gonna mark 2 lines going in from the short edge and then 2 lines going in from the long edges. The measurements for these are in the pattern. Now you're gonna take your zipper part of the gusset, you're gonna lay it right side down, exterior right side down, against the exterior side of your bottom gusset, and line up these short edges and clip together. And now we're gonna sew along the short clipped edge at 1/4 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. Now we're gonna add some binding to this edge. I'm gonna use my fold over elastic. You could also just use a cut of your water resistant canvas if you'd like, but I feel like this is pretty easy. So I'm just gonna cut a piece of binding that's just as wide as my gusset, and I'm going to take it and just wrap it around this short edge, folding it over and clipping it on. And now I'm going to sew on this binding strip at a 3/8 inch seam allowance from the folded edge. So we're not worried about the raw edge. We're doing 3/8 of an inch from the folded edge. Backstitch at the beginning and the end. So if you have any overhang on the sides, just trim those down so it's all nice and flush. And then you're going to flip this back so that seam goes against the bottom gusset, not behind the zipper. And then go to the front here. Try to make sure you don't rub off all your marks that you made. And I'm gonna top stitch this on at about 1/4 inch seam allowance. Let me see. Yeah, I'm gonna top stitch right along the bottom gusset here from the seam at 1/4 inch seam allowance, holding this seam that has the binding on it in place. All right, so we have one side done. Now we're gonna repeat that with the other side. So just flip the other side of your zipper so it's right sides together with the bottom. And once again, exterior right sides together. Match up these 2 short edges and clip in place. And now I'll take this to the sewing machine and we're gonna sew along the short edge at 1/4 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. Once you have that stitched together, cut yourself off a piece of binding of choice and adhere it however you'd like. The pattern doesn't do it the same way I'm doing it. You attach your binding however you'd like. So I'm just gonna clip this around that seam. And then I'm going to sew this binding on at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Trim down any overhang you might have. And then push that seam behind the bottom of your gusset. And then flip this out so you can see it. And then I'm going to top stitch 1/4 inch on the bottom gusset below the seam, back stitching at the beginning and the end, making sure I'm holding this seam in place behind it. If any of your marks have left you, like mine have, go ahead and redraw them on. I can still faintly see them, so I'm just gonna draw them back on. So now grab your triangle rings and some double-sided tape. And I'm just gonna add just a bit of double-sided tape to the back of each one of these rings, just like a 1/2 inch piece or so. So now let's start on one side here. So we're gonna look at our markings here, which might be difficult for you to see, but I have my little markings and we have a little square that's close to the seam. We're going to take our triangle ring with the tape on the back. I removed the paper and we're gonna lay it right side down. And so the ring is gonna go towards the center where the zipper is. And we're just going to lay it right over those marks. So it's going to go between the 2 horizontal marks and it's going to go right against the first vertical mark. So we have a second vertical mark below it. We're not worried about that yet. We're just going to put this right here. So you're going to stitch this on at 1/8 inch seam allowance from the bottom edge of the tab and then also at 1/4 inch seam allowance from the bottom of the tab. I suggest back stitching at the beginning and the end each time. Also leave the threads long, so leave the bobbin and the top threads really long for all those stitches, and we'll clean it up because this will be seen on the lining. We'll clean that up in just a minute. Now with your threads long, take your top threads, so the colorful threads on the top here, and pull them up so that you can see the bobbin thread come through on the exterior right side. So now you should have all your threads on the top here. So for example, over here on the side, I have 4 threads. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna split them up and I'm gonna knot them over on the right side because this is going to be covered up in just a minute. So instead of, you know, knotting these threads on the lining side where you'll see it in the end, knot them on this side and you won't ever see them. So trim that down. So do the same thing on the other side. So now I'm going to take one of my side straps, and on the wrong side of my side strap, I'm going to add some double-sided tape going right along the center on the back here. And then it's getting hard to see, but I have one more line drawn right here where I don't have anything lined up. That's for this guy. So I'm going to lay it wrong side down, right side up, and the bottom edge is going to line up with that mark, and it's going to completely cover the bottom of my little tab here. Isn't that pretty? Isn't that cute? So now I'm going to go to the sewing machine and I'm going to top stitch along all 4 edges of this side tab at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Isn't that pretty? Nice little tab all covered up. So now I'm going to repeat all those steps to attach the other little connector and the side strap on the other side. I'm going to do that off camera because it's the exact same thing as what I just showed you. Alright, so once I have them both added, to add a little bit of extra security to these, I'm going to add some rivets. So previously I added rivets just on the tab itself, but this time I think I'm actually going to rivet it to the gusset because I can. So I'm going to pick a spot that, let's see, I'm going to mark it centered on my tab, and it's about 1/4 of an inch above the top edge of this little side strap here. And I'm going to punch a hole through the tab and through the bottom gusset. And when I look on the back, I'm not punching a hole through the zipper or through the binding or anything like that. It's just the material for the gusset and the tab. And I'm not punching a hole through my top stitching on my tab either. I'm going right in the center of all that stuff. I'm just going to insert my rivet like that and pop it on the back. And this just is a little bit of extra reinforcement. I mean, actually, it's quite a bit of extra reinforcement. So when you're using the bag, you're not just depending on those stitches to hold everything in place. The rivet's really going to do a lot of the work. So I'm going to repeat that on the other side. And I'll grab my rivet press and give it a quick press. And there we go. That's going to add a lot of structure to this. I love it. So before we set this to the side, let's mark some midpoints. So line up the seams between the bottom gusset and the top gusset, and then pull along the top gusset and pinch where the fold is and mark that as a midpoint. I'm just going to use scissors for that. Repeat on the other side of your zipper gusset. It's the top gusset, I call it. And then once again, lining up those side seams. Pull along the bottom gusset and pinch and clip. Do this on both sides. And then pull those marks you made on the top and the bottom together like this. I like to add a couple clips. And then flatten out your gusset, and you're going to mark the midpoint between the top and the bottom. So once again, just clipping or marking with a pen, whatever's easiest for you. All right, so now you should have 4 marks on both sides of your gusset. You can set this to the side. Okay, so now we're gonna work on the front panel. And so the front panel has some lines you need to draw. Look at the diagram on the instructions. There are a couple more horizontal lines that go on the bottom, but that's really just for placement of your magnetic snap. Since I already added it, I don't need those ones. So I just brought in the vertical lines and then the top horizontal line. So these lines are gonna be to help us place our little card slot pocket. Isn't that cool? So on the back of your card slot ID window, flip it over, you're gonna add some double-sided tape. You're gonna wanna use the 1/8 of an inch wide double-sided tape. If you don't have tape, then maybe some very skinny glue or something like that, but you're gonna wanna add it along the very bottom edge, along the 2 sides, and then on the outside of the top edge, because this top bit here above the clear vinyl, that's gonna be what we need open, so don't put any tape there. So take all the paper off of all your double-sided tape. And now make sure you know which one is the top edge. So with top edge facing up and it's right side up, you're going to line up the top edge with that horizontal line, and you're going to line up the side edges with the 2 vertical lines. So it should look just like this, right above your magnetic snap. So tape it down. It should overhang the sides just a bit. And so now we're going to top stitch on. Look at the diagram. They have instructions on where to start and stop. But you're pretty much going to start here on the bottom left. And you're going to stitch over your previous top stitching. So we're going to go along the outer bits first. So on the underside of the top, the outer side of the side, top of the bottom. Then we're going to go down, go along the very bottom of the bottom piece here, up. And then over the top stitching on the top, along the other edge, along the top, up. Then you're going to go along the top edge of your pocket, and then once you get close to where the top stitching is already on the side, you're going to start going down, go right over that top stitching, over the top stitching on the bottom, over the top stitching on the other side, all the way up until you get to the very top edge of the top piece, and then off the side. Again, look at the diagram. Just go slow with this to make sure everything lines up and that you precisely cover your previous top stitching. Isn't that clever how it comes together? I think it's just so smart. I love that. All right, you can trim off the overhang. And now grab your curvature marking tool of choice, and you're gonna wanna mark the 2.5 inch circle curves on all 4 corners of this panel. Just mark it like that. And once you have those angles marked, just take some scissors and cut along those curves. So now instead of a sharp rectangle, we have a rounded corner rectangle. And after you cut those down, you can take this to the sewing machine and baste along each one of those cut corners just to make sure your stuff doesn't separate. If you feel like you're good without it, you don't have to, but I'm gonna do it. All right, now your front panel is all good. Air erasing marker takes quite a while to dry off of nylon, so if you're like, it's not coming off, if you get like a wet rag and just go over it, it'll actually, once it dries, it'll go away quicker, but air erasing marker just takes longer to disappear on nylon. So now grab your main back panel and we're gonna flip it over so we're looking at the lining side, and we're gonna use the pattern to draw a series of lines on the lining side. Once again, air erasing marker, water erasing marker, something that will come off. And now we're gonna use these lines to attach our little pockets here. So if you recall, I did not stitch down the sides and the bottoms of these pockets. So I'm gonna grab one of my pockets and I'm gonna lay it right side up, and I'm going to line it up with these marks. So I have 3 horizontal lines in the middle, 1 horizontal line on top. The first pocket is gonna go right underneath that first horizontal line, between the 2 vertical lines, and right above that first line on the bottom here. And we're gonna top stitch along the sides and the bottom at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch really well at the beginning and the end. So you see after you stitch that on, you have a cute little card pocket. Now, if you're worried, you're like, hey, but when I do that, isn't the stitching going to be on the exterior side? Yes, it is. This will be covered by a pocket later, but that stitching will be underneath the pocket. So if you didn't quilt it, you could definitely not baste these together, and you could just do these card slot pockets on the lining and then baste it to the exterior if you don't want this look. Again, this will be covered, but just something you could do. So now we're going to take our next card slot pocket, and if you have a specific one, this is the middle one, and we're going to lay it right side up, and we're going to line it up with the line just beneath that one that we just used, and make sure it lines up on the edges on the sides here. And just like we did before, we're going to start at the very top of this pocket, top stitch at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance along the sides and the bottom, back stitching at the beginning and the end. All right, I always like to just double check to make sure I didn't close the tops. Now we're going to grab the third and final pocket and lay it right side up, match it up with the very bottom horizontal line, matching it up with the sides as well, top stitch along the sides and the bottom, back stitch at the beginning and the end. So now lay your back panel exterior right side up, grab your pocket, lay your pocket exterior or contrasting, coordinating right side up, match up the bottom edges, the side edges, and the bottom corners, and clip these together. So you see how this pocket just covers all that stitching that we just did? So it's personal preference. Like I said, you could always just attach those pockets to the lining first and then baste them together if you're not quilting this. And now we can attach this pocket by basting along the sides and the bottom at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once you have that pocket attached, we're going to round the corners. So once again, I'm going to use my little corner marking tool, and you can draw this on either side. I mean, you could do it on the exterior or the lining side. I just find the lining side is easier most of the time. So I'm just going to draw out my corners and cut them. So now with your back panel facing exterior side up, mark the midpoint on the top edge, which we should have done in the beginning. But mark the midpoint on this top edge, and then lay your flap exterior side down, so it's exteriors right sides together. Match up these 2 pieces on the top edge here at their midpoints and clip in place. Now I'm going to take this to the sewing machine, and I'm going to baste along the cut rounded corners, and I'm going to baste this top flap on, all at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so all we have left to do is to put it all together. You have a front panel, a back panel, and a middle. All of these need to have 4 marks. So we already did the gusset where we have the marks, the midpoint marks on the top and the bottom, and then the midpoint marks on the side. You're going to do that for the front and the back panels as well. Midpoint marks on top and bottom, midpoint marks on the side. That's going to be important here. So we're going to start by attaching the back panel. Now remember, the back panel has this flap, so you need to get that flap out of the way. Do not sew over your flap on accident. So take your exterior back panel and lay it right side up. So the flap is lining side up, but the exterior panel is right side up. And then grab your gusset and you're going to flip this so it's lining side out. And you're going to find the midpoint along the zipper portion, and you're going to line that up with the midpoint on the top of your back panel. And then line up the midpoints, moving the flap out of the way. Line up the midpoints on the bottom part of the gusset with the bottom of the back panel, clipping together. And moving over to the sides, once again, moving the flap out of the way, clip together the side midpoint marks, just for both sides. And then just add clips along all the straight edges, and we'll do the curves last. So do as much of the straight bits as you can. And then once you get up to these curves, you just want to hug them around the main panel. And you might find it easier if you grab some scissors and just do like 2 or 3 little cuts right in the seam, so like no more than 1/8 of an inch into the gusset, to let it spread around the curve of the back panel. Just very, very carefully. Don't overcut this. Don't cut them too deep, and don't do too many cuts. Just a couple is enough. If you need more later, you can add them at the sewing machine. Okay, once you have it all clipped, we want to take this to the sewing machine. Make sure the flap, once again, stays out of the way. Have the gusset lining side up. This is my preference. If you like to attach it differently, then go for it. But I find it easiest with the gusset lining side up, the lining side of the back panel on the sewing machine bed. And we're going to stitch around this clipped edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Use a zipper foot and a stiletto. That'll help. Go really slow and backstitch at the beginning and the end. Alrighty, so once you have that attached, just double check you didn't accidentally sew in your flap anywhere. Go around the sides, make sure everything looks good. You don't have any pinches or pleats or anything. And then I'm going to attach my binding. So I like to start at the bottom, and I like to always attach binding with the main panel lining facing me, because that's what I'm going to not see whenever I'm sewing. So I want to make sure I'm covering everything now. So I'm going to grab my binding, and I'm just going to wrap it around the edge and clip it in place. And just like we did on the flap, I give it a little stretch because it is elastic. I give it a little stretch around those corners so that it's nice and smooth. Once I get back to where I started, I like my binding to overhang by about 3/4 to 1 inch. And then I just wrap it around where I started and clip it in place. So now I'm going to take this back to the sewing machine, and once again, with the gusset lining facing up, I'm going to top stitch this binding in place at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, just like a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, so just slightly less than what I stitched on. It'll still cover the stitching, don't worry. Backstitch at the beginning and the end, use a stiletto and a zipper foot. So once you have the binding stitched on, check the back to make sure you caught it everywhere, and you can kind of pop this out a little bit. You see that? And then the flap will go over the zipper like that. Isn't that cool? Okay, so now open your main zipper up top here. Tuck in that flap again. And now grab your main front panel and lay it right side up. Make sure the top's on the top. Sometimes I forget which side the top is, so use your opening on your clear pocket to help. And then take your unit and lay the gusset exterior right side down. Match up the midpoint on the zipper part of the gusset with the midpoint on the top of the front panel and clip together. That flap, man, really wants to get in there. Move it out of the way. And then match up the midpoint on the bottom and the side midpoint marks as well. And if you find it easier, you can open up that zipper and pull the flap out of the zipper like that. Just don't get confused with that. And then once again, I'm just going to add clips around the straight edges. And then when you get to the curves, if you feel like you need it, just like 2 at the most 3 little clips to help it spread and go around the curve on the front panel. Okie dokie. So you're gonna have to smush down the back panel. So smush that back panel down, move the flap out of the way, and with the gusset lining side up, we're going to stitch around the clipped edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, stiletto, zipper foot, back stitch. Just go slow here. You got this. All right, it's always a little bit harder to attach the second panel versus the first panel. So if you struggled with that, that's normal. Okay, but the last step is going to be attaching the binding. So once again, I'm going to start at the bottom, and I'm going to look at the lining side of my front panel. And I'm just going to wrap this around that seam and clip in place. All right, once you have it wrapped, just take this back to the machine. Once again, I'm going to do it with the lining of the gusset facing up. And I'm going to top stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance or just under a 1/4 inch seam allowance using a stiletto zipper foot. Back stitching at the beginning and the end. This is the last part of sewing. All right, you did it. You did it. I'm going to melt down the ends of my binding a little bit. There we go. And now we're going to flip this bag right side out. As you flip it out, just carefully push out those corners. The nice thing about binding is that even with thinner material, the act of binding, it creates like a skeleton called, in wedding dresses and fancy dresses, it's called boning. But it creates structure without adding a lot of stabilizer or anything like that. Look how stinking cute this is. So yeah, I'm still waiting for those lines to fade on the front panel, but that's okay, they will. They will, don't worry. So give it some love, give it some zhuzhing. If you need to run an iron over it, go for it. I'm just gonna close this zipper, give it a little bit of love, and let's pull the flap down. Snap it shut. Oh my goodness, isn't that just so precious? And here's the back with our little slip pocket. Oh my word. Okay, strap. All right, the last piece of the puzzle. Let's add our strap to this. And we properly did the zipper so it's not a slip pocket, it's a pocket. How adorable is this bag? I love it. I hope you do too. Oh my gosh, this is so cute. Oh my word, isn't she so pretty? That reflection of that vinyl is gonna drive me crazy. Isn't she gorgeous? This is just such a dainty, dainty, beautiful bag. This would be a great like back to school bag too. I feel like for a high schooler, especially even in middle school. I mean, Mila, when she goes to school, she has a big backpack that is like jam stuffed with stuff. And so she has another smaller bag she wears all the time with just like her pens and her phone and her calculator, just the basic things so she doesn't have to pull everything out of her backpack. This would be a great bag for something like that. Just the bare minimum things. So again, they don't have to dig around everywhere. It's all about organization. When you have to carry a lot of things, you need to be organized really well, or you end up with a situation where you're literally dumping a giant bag or backpack all over the floor, and nobody wants to do that. So I hope you love making this. I feel like it came together really well. I think the material I chose worked really, really well. We had to make a couple little tweaks for the magnetic snap, but overall, I would say this is a pretty simple make. These curves are not that bad. They're not difficult at all to sew around. This is I would say this is a good beginner pattern. I really would say that. I know there's quite a bit to it and it takes a little bit of time, but you're going to learn a lot as a beginner if you play with this pattern. Thank you so much for sewing with me today. I hope you're having a great day. Have a fantastic rest of the week. Get out there and make something. Bye, guys.